This happened to me about 2 years ago when I was 22. I worked the closing shift at a small local bar in my town, and on weekends I'd usually get out around 1:30 or 2 in the morning. Most nights I'd just head straight home, but on this particular night, I was starving. There's this old diner about 10 minutes from the bar, one of those 24-hour places that always has a few night owls or truckers in there. I'd eaten there plenty of times before and never had an issue. When I pulled into the lot, there were only 2 other cars, one of them being the cook's beat-up sedan. I figured it'd be quiet inside. The only customers I saw when I walked in were 2 old guys at the counter and a man sitting alone in a booth by the window. He looked like he was in his 50s, gray hair, wearing a baseball cap and one of those dark green work jackets. I didn't pay him much attention at first. I took a booth in the back corner, facing the entrance. The waitress came over, a woman I'd seen there before, and took my order. I remember getting a bacon cheeseburger and a coffee. While I waited, I just scrolled through my phone, trying to stay awake. But after a few minutes, I noticed the man in the window booth kept looking over at me. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. But every time I glanced up from my phone, his head would be turned just enough that he could have been watching me. I tried to brush it off. It was late, maybe he was drunk or just weird. But then, as the waitress brought over my food, she quietly leaned in and said under her breath, "Hey, if that guy's bothering you, let me know." That set off alarm bells in my head. I asked her if she knew him, and she just shook her head and said, "He's been sitting there since my shift started at 10. Hasn't ordered anything but a black coffee, and he keeps watching people." Now I was on edge. I stole another glance at the guy, and sure enough, he was still staring at me. Not eating, not looking away when I caught him. Just sitting there motionless, like he was waiting for something. I quickly ate my burger and decided to get the hell out of there. I asked the waitress for the check and she brought it over right away. I left a good tip and started heading for the door. That's when the man in the booth stood up. As I reached the door, I could hear his footsteps following behind me. I pushed through the glass door into the parking lot and walked as fast as I could toward my car. It was dead, silent outside, except for my own footsteps and his, just a few yards behind. When I reached my car, I fumbled with my keys. I could feel him getting closer, and in a moment of pure adrenaline, I turned around and shouted, "What the hell do you want?" He just stopped dead in his tracks, maybe 5 feet away from me. Under the dim parking lot lights, I could see his face clearer, pale, sunken eyes, deep lines in his skin like he hadn't slept in days. He smiled this sick, crooked smile and said, "Nice car. Mind giving me a ride?" I didn't answer. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and reversed out of there so fast I almost hit a light post. As I peeled out of the lot, I looked in my rearview mirror. He was still standing in the same spot, watching me drive away. I called the diner about 10 minutes later to check in, asked the waitress if he was still there. She told me he left right after I did, just walked off into the dark. I never went back to that diner again after that night. Always trust your instincts. Stay safe out there. I work a job that sometimes requires me to drive long distances to small towns across my state. A few months ago, I was sent on a solo job that had me driving through the middle of nowhere in the dead of night. It was one of those stretches of highway where you don't see another car for miles. No street lights, just the 2-lane road cutting through the woods. I was already on edge from the sheer emptiness of it all, and to make it worse, my phone barely had any signal. Around 1:30 a.m., I realized I desperately needed to use the bathroom and decided to stop at the next rest area I came across. When I pulled in, the place was completely deserted. One flickering overhead light in the parking lot, 2 vending machines, and a small brick building labeled restrooms. There were no cars, no trucks, no sounds. Just the hum of the vending machines and the occasional chirp of crickets. I parked as close to the restroom building as I could and quickly got out of the car. The whole place gave me the creeps. Something about how empty it was made the air feel heavier, but I really had to go. The inside of the bathroom was just as bad. Dim yellow lighting, stained walls, cracked mirrors, 1 urinal, 2 stalls, and a sink. The place smelled awful, like mildew and old air freshener. I chose the stall furthest from the door, quickly did my business, and was about to open the stall door when I heard it. The bathroom door creaked open. At first, I figured maybe another driver had pulled in, but I hadn't seen or heard another car. Then, slow, deliberate footsteps echoed on the tile floor. They didn't go to the urinal or to a stall. They just stopped. Right outside my stall, I held my breath, listening. No sounds of someone moving around, no jingling keys or phone noises, just this person standing there, not saying a word. I slowly bent down to look under the stall door, and I kid you not, I saw a pair of mud-caked, heavy work boots facing my stall. Whoever it was just stood there. I sat frozen for what felt like minutes. Then the boots moved, not away, but to the side, as if pacing slowly in front of the stalls. I could hear faint, shallow breathing now. Without warning, a sharp knock hit my stall door. I jumped, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't respond. Another knock, harder this time. Then a voice, deep, gravelly, emotionless. "You alone in here?" I stayed silent. I didn't even dare move. A long pause. Then the voice spoke again. "I know you're in there." At that point, I was borderline panicking. I knew if I stayed in that stall, whatever this was wouldn't end well. I quickly looked around. The stall had no window, and climbing under it wouldn't work. The gap was too narrow. But the wall to my left separated the bathroom from the outside. I made a split-second decision. I grabbed the small metal trash can from beside the toilet and slammed it against the stall divider. It made a loud, clanging noise that echoed through the bathroom. I heard the boots shuffle quickly toward the noise, and in that exact moment, I threw open the stall door and sprinted past him. As I ran, I got a split-second look at the guy. Mid-50s, greasy gray hair under a trucker hat, patchy beard, wearing a ratty flannel shirt. His eyes were completely unhinged, wild, bloodshot, with a stare that shot straight through me. He reached out, trying to grab my arm, but I was too fast. I burst through the bathroom door and sprinted toward my car, fumbling with my keys. I dove into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and peeled out of the lot. My headlights briefly illuminated the front of the building, and the man was standing there, just outside the bathroom, watching me leave. He didn't chase. He just stood there. I drove for miles before stopping at a gas station to call the police. I told them everything and gave them the location. They said they'd send a unit to check it out. An officer called me back. They searched the rest stop, but no one was there. No sign of the man. But they did find something. A large hunting knife on the sink counter. Since then, I refuse to stop at those isolated rest areas at night, and I'll never forget those boots or those eyes.
I don't know why I chose that diner. Maybe it was because of the neon sign flickering like it was struggling to stay alive. I was tired, hungry, and it was the only thing open on that stretch of road in the middle of nowhere. It was one of those old school diners, the kind you only see in small towns. Metallic exterior, red leather booths, and that smell of grease that hits you before the door even swings shut behind you. It was just after midnight, and the place was almost empty except for a trucker at the counter and the waitress leaning against the register, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up, but the trucker did. His eyes followed me as I slid into a booth near the back, far from everyone else. I didn't think much of it. Truckers always gave me the creeps, but it was late, and I wasn't in the mood to deal with it. The trucker was still watching me. I could feel his eyes on me even though I wasn't looking at him. But it wasn't just him. The whole place had this tension, like something was wrong, but no one was saying anything. The waitress brought my coffee and then went back to standing at the register, still scrolling on her phone. She didn't even make eye contact. The waitress finally came over. She was pale, tired looking, like she'd been there for days. She handed me a greasy menu and muttered, "Coffee's fresh." Her voice was flat, almost robotic. I just nodded and ordered a burger. That's when I noticed it. The diner was quiet. Too quiet. No music, no clinking dishes in the kitchen, no conversation, just the hum of the neon sign outside. And then I heard it, faint at first, but unmistakable, the sound of something scratching. Not from the kitchen, not from behind the counter, but from beneath the booth where I was sitting. I froze, my hand halfway to my cup. The scratching was slow, deliberate, like something was down there, just under the seat, waiting. I slid out of the booth, trying not to draw attention to myself, but my shoes squeaked against the tile, louder than I wanted. The trucker's eyes were still on me, and he gave a small, twisted smile like he knew something I didn't. I knelt down, heart pounding, and peeked under the booth. Nothing. The space was empty. I let out a shaky breath and told myself I was just tired, that my mind was playing tricks on me. I sat back down, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The scratching had stopped, but now there was this heaviness in the air. Like the diner itself was watching me. The waitress came back with my burger. She placed it in front of me without a word, but as she turned to walk away, I noticed something. Her shoes, they were covered in mud. Fresh mud, like she'd just walked in from outside, but I hadn't seen her leave. I didn't touch the food. I couldn't. My stomach was in knots, and the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. I needed to get out of there. I grabbed my jacket, threw a crumpled 20 on the table, and headed for the door. But as I passed the trucker, he grabbed my wrist. His grip was ice cold. He leaned in close and whispered,
"It doesn't like when people leave."
I yanked my arm free and bolted out of the diner. The cold night air hit me like a slap to the face, but I didn't stop running until I was back in my car. As I fumbled with my keys, I glanced back at the diner. The trucker was standing in the window, staring at me with that same twisted smile. And behind him, through the flickering neon light, I could see the waitress. Only, she wasn't standing at the register anymore. She was crawling out from under my booth. I floored it, peeling out of the parking lot, and didn't stop driving until I was miles away. I never went back to that diner, and I've never driven that road again. But sometimes, late at night, I hear that same scratching. It's faint, just under the bed, or behind the walls. And every time, I wonder if it finally followed me home. I had been driving for hours, long past the point of exhaustion. It was a desolate stretch of highway, miles of nothing but open road. When I spotted it, an old diner with a flickering neon sign that read open. The sign blinked on and off, like it was fighting to stay alive, and I had this weird sense of relief. I needed to stop, even just for a moment. The diner itself looked ancient, the kind of place where you feel like time stands still. I pulled into the empty parking lot, and as soon as I got out of the car, the cold hit me, sharper than it had been all night. There were no other cars, no sound except for the wind. When I stepped inside, the smell of old grease and coffee hit me like a wall. It was dimly lit, with worn-out booths and a faded jukebox in the corner that hadn't seen use in decades. The place was dead quiet. There was only one other person in there, a man sitting at the counter, hunched over his coffee. His clothes were filthy, like he'd been on the road forever. A waitress appeared, almost out of nowhere, like she'd been waiting for me. She was middle-aged, with tired eyes and the same greasy look the diner had, like she'd been a part of it for too long. I took a seat in a booth far from the man at the counter. The waitress didn't ask what I wanted. She just poured me a cup of coffee and walked away without saying a word. That's when I noticed the man at the counter was staring at me. Not in a curious way, but like he was studying me, watching every move I made. His eyes were dark, sunken into his face, and he didn't blink. I tried to ignore him, telling myself he was probably just some lonely guy looking for company. but something about him was off. Really off. After what felt like hours, I finally got up the nerve to look back at him. He was still staring, but now he was smiling. A wide, unnatural grin that sent a chill down my spine. He hadn't touched his coffee. The waitress came back, placing a plate of food in front of me, something I hadn't even ordered. It was a greasy plate of eggs and bacon, but I wasn't hungry anymore. I just wanted to leave. As I pushed the plate away, the man at the counter stood up. His movements were slow, deliberate. He walked toward my booth without saying a word. My heart started pounding, and I felt that instinctive fight or flight kick in. I stood up, but before I could make it to the door, he was blocking my way.
You shouldn't be here,
he said, his voice raspy like he hadn't used it in a long time. I didn't say anything, just stared back at him, frozen. His eyes were wild now, the grin still plastered on his face.
You made a mistake coming in,
he added, stepping closer. I could smell the stench of his clothes, like old sweat and gasoline. The waitress was nowhere in sight. I tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. My hand instinctively went for my phone in my pocket, but he grabbed my arm, his grip like iron.
Don't,
he whispered. I managed to pull free and bolted for the door. My hands were shaking so bad, it took a few tries to pull it open. As soon as I got outside, the cold air hit me again, but this time it felt like a slap to the face. I ran to my car, jumped in, and peeled out of the parking lot without looking back. When I was a few miles down the road, I finally slowed down and tried to calm myself. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and my blood turned to ice. The man was sitting in the back seat. I slammed on the brakes and whipped around, but the seat was empty. There was no one there. Just me. I don't know what happened that night, or who, or what I saw in that diner. But I know one thing for sure, I'll never take that road again. And if you ever find yourself on a lonely stretch of highway, passing by an old diner with a flickering sign, do yourself a favor. Keep driving. When I was 15, I had a sleepover at my friend Matt's house. He lived in a quiet, isolated area, with thick woods just behind his backyard. His parents were out for the night, so it was just the two of us. We stayed up late watching movies, snacking, and messing around, but by 2 a.m., we decided to head to bed. Matt's room was on the second floor, and his window looked out over the backyard and the trees beyond. As we lay in our sleeping bags, we started hearing noises, like branches snapping in the distance. At first, we thought it was just animals. But after a louder, closer snap, Matt sat up.
You hear that?
He asked. I nodded, feeling uneasy. We looked out the window, but it was too dark to see anything beyond the yard. After a few minutes of silence, we figured it was nothing and settled back down to sleep. A few hours later, I woke up. Something was wrong. The room was completely silent, unnaturally so. I glanced at the window and my stomach dropped. It was wide open. I was certain we had closed it before bed. The cool night air was creeping into the room. When I got up to shut it, I happened to glance into the yard, and that's when I saw him. A figure standing at the edge of the tree line. At first, I thought it was a shadow or a trick of the light, but no, this was a person. A man. He was standing perfectly still, facing the house, staring directly up at Matt's window. Staring at me. I froze. My mind raced. He didn't move, didn't flinch. He just stood there, silent, watching. I carefully closed the window, trying not to make a sound, and backed away. My heart was pounding, but I didn't wake Matt. I didn't want to believe what I saw. I climbed back into my sleeping bag, My eyes locked on the window, waiting for any sign of movement. But when I looked again, the figure was gone. I lay awake for the rest of the night, listening to the heavy silence, expecting to hear footsteps or the sound of the door opening, but nothing came. The next morning, I told Matt. He laughed it off, saying I probably imagined it, but when we went downstairs, we both stopped in our tracks. There, on the back door leading out to the yard, was a muddy handprint. It wasn't there the night before. Matt's face went pale. We didn't say anything more about it, but I knew he was just as freaked out as I was. Since that night, I've always made sure to check the locks on every window before going to bed. I never want to look out and see something or someone watching again.